The first thing I noticed was the ceiling. It was too beautiful for a ceiling. Coffered, cream white, edged with gold trim that caught the morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling curtains so heavy they could have blocked out the sun on principle. Not my ceiling. My ceiling had a water stain in the shape of Italy and a smoke detector that beeped every 6 months at 3 in the morning as if it had decided to commit to making me miserable in installments. The second thing I noticed was the silence. Heavy, expensive silence. The kind of silence money constructs deliberately. Thick walls, triple-glazed windows, velvet drapes so dense that even the Las Vegas Strip sounds like it's happening to someone else in another country in a quieter life. The third thing I noticed, and this one took me considerably longer, because my brain was moving through something thicker than thought, something resembling cement mixed with shame and several glasses of champagne, was the ring. On my left hand, fourth finger, a ring, thin gold band, simple, elegant, and absolutely, categorically, definitively not mine. I stared at it for what felt like a full minute. My mouth tasted like champagne and regret, and at least one decision I had not run through my better judgment before making. My hair was a crime scene. I was still wearing most of last night's dress, the deep plum silk thing I had saved for 2 months to buy, specifically to look like someone who belonged at the Meridian Hotel Group's annual industry gala. The gala. I remembered the gala. I remembered the champagne tower. I remembered making a toast to something, or someone, with a glass that kept getting refilled by a server who treated responsible limits as a personal insult. I remembered the balcony and the city lights below it, and the fact that the night air had smelled like desert warmth and possibility. After that, impressionist painting. Blurs of light and sound and laughter and something that felt, in the blurred memory of it, like honesty. And now, this ceiling, this silence, this ring. I sat up slowly, which was a mistake my skull immediately reported back on with considerable feeling. I gripped the edge of the mattress, sheets so smooth they seemed to have been ironed by someone paid very well to think about ironing, and waited for the room to stop pitching. That was when I saw her. She was asleep on the other side of the bed, lying on her back, one arm resting across her waist, dark hair spread across the pillow in a way that looked almost composed, even in sleep, like the aesthetic instinct was operating on autopilot. She was still wearing a black evening gown, though the jacket had been draped with precision over the chair by the window. Her face, in the particular surrender of sleep, was softer than I'd ever seen it, fewer edges. The severe architecture of those cheekbones less weaponized, the line of her jaw unclenched, the space between her brows smoothed into something that approached ordinary peace. I knew her face. Everyone in the luxury events and hospitality industry knew her face. It appeared on panels and in trade publications and in the sideways references people made at conferences when they were trying to signal how well connected they were. Seraphine Arden, the older Arden sister, the dangerous one, the one people discussed at industry gatherings in the way you discuss significant weather systems, not unkindly, but with the same odd, slightly wide-eyed respect you give to things capable of leveling buildings with very little visible effort. Seraphine Arden, who ran the Arden Group's Hotel Acquisitions and Development Division, who had more professional connections than some mid-sized governments, who had, according to reliably circulated industry legend, once made a VP of operations cry simply by asking him, in a tone of perfect courtesy, whether he'd like to explain his Q3 projections in more detail. Seraphine Arden, whose younger sister was Celeste Arden, the woman who had stolen my largest client 6 months ago by underbidding me on a proposal and then publicly claimed my event concepts had been derivative of her team's earlier work, a claim that was false, provable as false, and that nonetheless circulated because Celeste Arden had a gift for planting seeds in industry soil and then standing back while other people watered them. Celeste Arden, who was, without meaningful competition, the person I least wanted to share a professional atmosphere with in any city, on any planet. I looked at the ring on my finger. I looked at Seraphine's left hand. There was a matching ring. The sound that came out of me was not dignified. I will not attempt to describe it. It fell somewhere between a gasp and a wheeze, and possibly a very small, private scream that I muffled almost immediately with the nearest pillow, which was fat and white and smelled of expensive laundry detergent, and underneath that, faintly, of gardenias. Seraphine Arden's eyes opened. She did not startle. She did not flail or gasp or clutch anything. She simply opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling for a measured moment, and then turned her head to look at me. Her expression was the most controlled thing I had ever witnessed on a human face. She appeared to take in the entire situation. Me, crouching on my side of the bed, clutching a pillow like a shield, still in last night's dress, hair indicating that several decisions had been made poorly, expression indicating I was fully aware of this, with the composed interest of someone reading an unexpected but not entirely unmanageable financial report. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was low and measured, not warm, not hostile, occupying some precise middle territory I couldn't quite map. "Is it?" I said. Brilliant, incisive, Nora Whitlock at her absolute sharpest. Her gaze moved to her own left hand. For the first time, something shifted in that composed expression. Not panic. Seraphine Arden, I would come to understand, did not panic. What passed across her face was more like the visual equivalent of recalculation, a brief, precise acknowledgement that the incoming data was unexpected and that a new set of parameters would need to be applied. She sat up slowly. Even her hair, slightly disheveled from sleep, managed to look almost intentional, like even her imperfection operated within some aesthetic principle. She looked at the ring again, then at me. "Do you remember," she said carefully, "how this happened?" "I remember a champagne tower," I said, "and then nothing useful, and then your ceiling." "My ceiling," she said, glancing upward. "Yes, this is my suite." Of course it was. Of course, Seraphine Arden had a suite at the Bellagio while I'd booked a standard room 4 blocks away and been pleased with myself about the continental breakfast. "Right," I said. "Great. Love that for us. Is there water somewhere? My entire skull is attempting to negotiate a departure from my body." She rose from the bed with a kind of unhurried elegance that I found personally offensive given the circumstances. She crossed to the minibar and returned with a cold bottle of water. She disappeared briefly into the suite's bathroom and came back with 2 ibuprofen, which she set on the nightstand on my side of the bed, with the careful precision of someone who had thought about exactly where to put them. Then she moved to the chair by the window and picked up something from the floor, a folded piece of paper that had apparently spent the night there, patient and damning. She unfolded it. She read it. The recalculating expression returned. "It appears," she said, "that we were married last night." "I know," I said, because I was holding my own hand and the ring was right there, being extremely straightforward about its existence. "At the Little Hearts Chapel on South Las Vegas Boulevard." She turned the paper so I could see it. A marriage certificate, formal and unapologetic, bearing both our names in what I recognized with a small internal collapse as my own handwriting. Nora Whitlock, Seraphine Arden. Witnesses: 2 people named Judy and Ron. "Judy and Ron," I said. "Evidently." I took the certificate from her. I held it and stared at it. The date was yesterday. The time was 2:47 in the morning. We had been married at 2:47 a.m. after a hotel industry gala by someone named Reverend Dickie Holt. "Reverend Dickie Holt," I said. I noticed that as well. My phone was on the nightstand on my side, which meant someone had thought to plug in both our phones at some point, which either meant one of us had been more coherent than I'd assumed, or Seraphine Arden simply operated at a baseline level of logistical responsibility, even while apparently getting impulsively married to a stranger at 2 a.m. There were 14 messages from Lila. I opened the first. Nora. "Where are you? I saw you leave with Seraphine Arden around midnight, and I cannot find you anywhere, and please tell me you are not dead or in jail." Then, 4 hours later, "Okay, you're not dead, because I just saw a photo of you 2 at some chapel on someone's Instagram story, and I have literally so many questions and I need you to call me immediately. Like right now, Nora, I mean it." I turned the screen so Seraphine could read it. She read it with the same expression she probably wore, reading quarterly earnings updates. "There are photos," she said. "There are photos," I confirmed. "From someone's Instagram story. We apparently have fans." She moved to the armchair by the window, sat with her legs crossed, and appeared to think. I watched her think, which was its own particular experience, Even engaged in quiet internal deliberation, she looked like someone who had been designed by a person with an extremely clear creative vision and an extensive budget. There was something almost frustrating about being in the same room as someone that composed when you yourself felt like a draft letter that had been crumpled and uncrumpled several times without improving. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. The memories came in fragments, the way dream details retreat the harder you reach for them. Seraphine at the gala, standing at the edge of the crowd near the balcony doors, holding a glass of champagne and looking like she would genuinely prefer to be in a quieter country. Me, already 3 glasses deep and feeling the loosening of the usual filters, somehow ending up beside her because the room had been loud and the balcony had been quiet and we had both, apparently, been drawn to the same exit. I remembered saying something honest, the kind of honest that only surfaces when the layers of professional management have gone temporarily offline. I remembered talking about the Whitlock family business collapse, my father's company losing its certification, the industry fallout, the years of being looked at with that specific mixture of sympathy and distance that people give to someone whose name now means something uncomfortable. I remembered being surprised that I was saying it and more surprised that she was listening. I remembered her hand in mine. Not romantic, at first just warm and present. I remembered laughing at something I could no longer reconstruct. A taxi, a small building with a neon heart in the window, Reverend Dickie Holt, who had apparently been very agreeable at 2:47 in the morning. I remembered thinking, with a particular logic available only at that hour, this feels like something true. What I did not remember was exactly what I'd said to get us there. Seraphine looked up from her thoughts. The annulment should be straightforward, she said. Nevada allows it in cases of intoxication. I'll have my lawyer start the paperwork today. And there it was. The practical, reasonable, correct response. The only response, really, from a sensible adult who had found herself accidentally married to a professional stranger. Right, I said. Yes, absolutely. I assume you're in agreement? Completely, I said. 100%. This is obviously... Yes. Something moved across her face, a flicker too brief to name. It was gone before I could get a proper look at it. Good, she said. The silence that followed was the expensive kind again. Through the heavy drapes, the muffled sounds of Las Vegas waking up, that city that never really sleeps so much as dims slightly and then recommits. I looked at the ring. I had no rational reason to feel strange about the idea of removing it. We were strangers. She was my enemy's older sister. The most sensible thing I had ever done would be to get this annulled quickly and quietly, go back to my studio and pretend this entire evening had happened to someone with worse judgment than me. I took the ibuprofen. I drank half the water bottle in one long pull. I told myself the strange hollow ache in my chest was dehydration and reasonable hangover anxiety. I told myself this very firmly. I remained unconvinced. She ordered breakfast without asking what I wanted. I was prepared to be annoyed about this. The tray arrived and contained exactly what I would have chosen. Eggs with fresh herbs, strong coffee, sourdough toast, a small dish of fruit I would eat all of before the eggs because I always eat the fruit first, and I hadn't told her this. I stared at the fruit. How did you... I started. You held the champagne glass in your right hand all evening, she said, spreading butter across her own toast with precise, unhurried strokes, and reached for the hors d'oeuvres tray with your left whenever it had something green on it. You didn't touch the smoked salmon. You drank water between glasses, but only when you thought no one was watching, which suggests you were trying to pace yourself. You ordered a coffee after the main speeches even though it was past midnight, which suggests a high caffeine tolerance and a preference for function over sleep. The eggs were a reasonable inference. Reasonable. I stared at her. You notice a great deal, I said. I pay attention, she said. It's different. Except the quiet annulment didn't happen. It never does it? Life, in my experience, has a deeply theatrical streak it refuses to suppress for anyone's convenience. By the time we'd finished breakfast and I'd retrieved my jacket from wherever it had ended up the night before, my phone was vibrating with things beyond Lila. industry people, a journalist I had dealt with once for a venue feature article, and then, at 9:24 a.m. on a Sunday morning, a call from a number I'd saved under a contact name I cannot repeat in respectable company. Celeste. I stared at the screen. Seraphine, reviewing something on her own phone, glanced over and clocked the name before I could angle the screen away. Her expression didn't change, but something in the angle of her shoulders did. A subtle internal close, like a door being quietly shut from the inside. "Don't answer it yet," she said. "She'll have seen the photos. She's already seen them." Seraphine set her phone face down on the table. Her voice had gone very level. "She called me 11 minutes ago. I didn't answer either." I looked at her. "How are you this calm?" She considered the question as though it were genuinely interesting. "Practice," she said, and the word landed with a weight that I felt but didn't yet understand. The photos moved through the industry grapevine the way these things always do, with the speed of people who have been waiting, collectively, for exactly this particular kind of story. By noon, pieces were being written. I could feel them being assembled in distant editorial rooms as I sat in the hotel car on the way back to my original 4 blocks away standard room. Nora Whitlock, of the disgraced Whitlock family, of the scrappy little event design studio she'd been methodically building for 4 years on a combination of talent and stubbornness, had somehow managed to marry into the Ardens. I could already see how the narrative was being shaped around me, without me, not a love story, a power play. The first article appeared before dinner. Industry rivals or industry royalty, event designer Nora Whitlock and Arden Group, executive Seraphine Arden's shocking Las Vegas wedding raises questions. My studio email received 19 messages that day. They ranged from congratulations I didn't know how to receive, to press requests, to one very pointed note from a prospective client who'd been considering me for a significant fundraising gala and now wanted to reassess the professional fit given recent developments. I was sitting in my studio the following afternoon, surrounded by fabric samples and a laptop showing me things I did not want to read, when Seraphine appeared in my doorway. I hadn't given her my address. She had found it through whatever mechanisms are available to someone who runs acquisitions for one of the largest luxury hospitality groups on the continent. "We have a problem," she said. "I'm aware," I said. "Would you like to come in, or are you just here to confirm that, yes, my professional reputation is currently folding like a lawn chair in a weather event?" She came in. She looked around the studio with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. The mood boards pinned to the cork boards, the sample fabrics arranged by weight and color, the miniature table centerpiece, models on the shelf I'd built from salvaged wood, the flowers in 3 different stages of freshness, because I was always in the middle of something. She looked at it all carefully, not with condescension. More like she was taking inventory of something that mattered. "Celeste has spoken to the family's PR contact," Seraphine said. "She is positioning the marriage as either a calculated move on your part for professional advantage or evidence that I have experienced some kind of," she used the phrase, "loss of judgment under duress." "That's generous to both of us." "She's protecting herself, the Arden name." Something passed through her expression that I couldn't hold. "As she sees it." "And what do you see it as?" Seraphine set her bag on the chair across from my work table and stood with her hands clasped, the picture of a composed woman who had measured what she was about to say very carefully before arriving. "A situation requiring management. If we annul immediately and publicly, the story becomes about a drunken mistake made by 2 professionals who should have known better. Both of us look reckless. If we instead release a statement together that we're taking time to consider the circumstances of a significant decision, the narrative shifts from scandal to something more considered." "You want to stay married," I said. "I want to control the process of becoming unmarried," she said. "For a month, possibly 6 weeks. We appear together at 2 or 3 public events. We present as adults handling an unusual situation with maturity and composure. The media cycle moves on. Then we dissolve the marriage quietly and both continue with our lives." I looked at her. "You've done this before? Manufactured a relationship for optics?" "No," she said, "but I understand how information cycles function." "And you don't think this makes things worse?" "I think walking directly into Celeste's narrative will make things worse in ways that are substantially harder to recover from. For your business specifically. She held my gaze. I reviewed your studio's portfolio last night. You have a client roster that took years to build, 3 pending proposals that could define your next 2 years of revenue. Celeste knows this. She is betting that you'll be too destabilized to fight the story. I'm suggesting we don't give her the destabilization. I hated that she was right. I hated it with a specificity that suggested I had known it already and had been hoping someone else would find the counter-argument first. Fine, I said. 6 weeks, but I want the terms in writing. Something in her expression shifted toward what I would eventually learn was the closest she came to approval. I expected nothing less, she said. We were not natural at being fake newlyweds. This surprised exactly no one who knew us, which at that point was no one because we did not actually know each other at all. The first event was a hotel opening in downtown Las Vegas, smaller than the Meridian Gala, but dense with industry people who would be at the next 6 dinners where anything said here would be referenced. I wore a green dress. Seraphine wore black because Seraphine, I was learning, wore black the way other people wore armor, not for fashion but for the structural properties. She arrived at the entrance of my hotel room at 7:12 p.m. She looked at me with those dark, assessing eyes for a moment. You look like you're trying to look like you belong here, she said. Charming, I said. Is that a criticism? It's an observation. Stop trying. You designed the centerpieces for the Hartley summer wedding 2 years ago. Every person in that room either used your work as a reference point or spent energy not admitting they did. You belong here because you're genuinely good. Not because of me. You don't need to perform a rival. I didn't know what to do with that. I said nothing. In the elevator, she stood close because the elevator was a study in compact architecture. I could smell her perfume. Something dark and floral, specific to her in a way that I'd have been able to pick out of a crowd, which I noted and filed away in a drawer I wasn't looking at yet. Her shoulder brushed mine as the car descended. She didn't move away. If anyone asks how we met, she said quietly, we reconnected at the gala. We'd been in the same professional circles for years. That's actually true, I said. Then it requires very little maintenance. And if someone asks why we never... Some things develop slowly, she said. That also requires very little maintenance. I looked up at her. She was watching the elevator numbers. The line of her jaw was clean and precise in the overhead light. You're remarkably comfortable with constructed narratives, I said. I'm comfortable with protecting what matters, she said. There's a meaningful difference. The doors opened. She offered me her arm with the quiet ease of someone who had made this gesture 1,000 times, and I took it with the quiet ease of someone who had not, and we walked into the room together, and 200 industry professionals noticed without appearing to notice. Celeste was across the room. I found her immediately, the way you always find the thing you're braced against. She was in something wine-red, and her expression when she located us was the expression of someone who had prepared for a specific narrative and arrived to find the narrative had developed opinions of its own. Seraphine didn't look at her. That was the thing. She greeted people, she moved through the room, she kept me close without making it feel like management, a hand briefly at my back when a circle of people talked past me, a subtle pivot in conversation when a journalist began asking the pointed kind of questions. At one point, when a particularly persistent publicist started pressing for the story of how exactly we'd ended up at a chapel at 2:47 in the morning, Seraphine placed her hand over mine on the table, looked the woman steadily in the eye, and said, Some things don't benefit from being explained. They simply are. I think that's true of most things worth having, don't you? The publicist laughed, wrote something in her notes, moved on. I looked at our hands, the rings, Seraphine's over mine. She caught me looking. She didn't move her hand. The weeks arranged themselves into a kind of strange proximity I hadn't accounted for. We didn't live together, but we moved through each other's professional worlds more than either of us had planned. She appeared at my studio twice with what she called event documentation for Arden Group properties, and once, inexplicably, to leave a bag of takeout from a Thai restaurant I had mentioned once, in passing, at a dinner neither of us had been enjoying. I found out 3 weeks in that she had quietly recommended me for 3 hotel event contracts. Not suggested, recommended, directly, by name. I called her. You went behind my back, I said. I recommended a colleague whose work I respect. Her voice was perfectly level. "We are not colleagues. We are strangers who accidentally got legally married, and you don't get to purchase my gratitude by throwing contracts at me like I'm a project you're managing." A pause. "I'm not purchasing gratitude." "Then what are you doing?" A longer pause. When she spoke again, something in her voice had shifted, still controlled but differently, like a door held open an inch. "I don't know how to help someone without attempting to solve the problem," she said. "It's a limitation. I'm aware of it. I default to action when I should default to asking." I stood in the middle of my studio, phone to my ear, surrounded by the work I'd spent years building, and felt something soften in my chest that had no business softening in this particular conversation. "Seraphine, I won't do it again without telling you first. That's not the whole point." "Then tell me the whole point." "The point is that I need what I build to be real. My clients, my reputation, my studio. I need to know they're earned, not gifted by someone with the power to gift them. Not because I'm ungrateful, but because the whole reason I'm still doing this after everything with my family is that I need to know it's mine. I need to know the ground I'm standing on is solid because I built it." The silence that followed was the most honest silence we'd had. "I know that," she said quietly. "I know it better than you might expect." Something in the way she said it made me not ask a follow-up question. Not yet. The rooftop restaurant meeting with Celeste happened without warning, on a Thursday at a venue I had been at for a site visit. She appeared at the table where I was reviewing schematics over a late lunch, sat across from me without asking, and arranged herself with the practiced composure of someone who has rehearsed what they intend to say. "You know she destroys people," Celeste said. Not cruelly, with the tone of someone delivering an uncomfortable truth they're quite satisfied to know. "Everyone who gets genuinely close to Seraphine eventually finds that she's taken over. Their decisions, their career, their whole sense of what they're doing and why. She means well, allegedly, but good intentions don't stop being suffocating just because they're sincere." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I would rather lose gracefully than watch you become collateral damage when you discover you've made a significant error." I looked at her across the table. Really looked. Not as my professional adversary, not as the woman who'd stolen my client and damaged my reputation, just as a person sitting across from me with more fear in her eyes than she was managing to cover. "Or," I said, "you're afraid." Celeste's jaw tightened. "Of what, exactly?" "Of not being the one she's protecting anymore." I kept my voice even. "She's been cleaning up your mistakes for years. She's never thrown you out of the story. That's a lot of loyalty to feel suddenly threatened by." Celeste stood. Her composure had acquired a very fine crack that she was working hard to keep closed. "She's not what you think she is." "No," I said. "She's more." After Celeste left, I sat with my lukewarm coffee and the recognition that I had just said something true and felt entirely settled about it, which was its own kind of problem. The first sober kiss happened on a rainy Tuesday in Seraphine's penthouse, which I had arrived at uninvited and not particularly calm. She had moved the annulment timeline forward by 2 weeks, instructed her lawyer accordingly, and informed the family's PR contact, all without telling me. I found out through a mutual industry contact who mentioned, in a friendly way, that they'd heard things were being resolved. I learned what being resolved meant with approximately 20 minutes of terse research. Her assistant let me in. I noted that her assistant had what appeared to be standing instructions regarding me and filed it into the same drawer I was still not examining. The penthouse was large and disciplined and very much like its owner, elegant, restrained, everything in it chosen with clear intention and arranged without performance. There were books everywhere, which surprised me, more than the space strictly required. There was also on a high shelf by the west window a row of small ceramic animals that appeared to have been made by hand, rough-edged, imperfect, each one clearly old and clearly kept with care. They were completely at odds with everything else in the room and absolutely fascinating. Seraphine emerged from her office still holding a pen. She saw my expression. "You found out," she said. "You moved the timeline without talking to me first. The press situation was—" "I don't care about the press situation right now. I care that you made a decision about my life and you didn't tell me." My voice was steadier than I felt. We agreed, in writing, that decisions about this marriage, including dissolving it, would be made together. She set the pen on the kitchen counter with the precision of someone buying time to form a careful response. I was managing I am not a situation, I said. I'm a person. You don't get to manage me without my knowledge and call it care. That landed. I saw it land, not with damage, with something more like recognition. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter while rain moved in long silver sheets down the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below us blurred and softened and went indistinct, and in the penthouse there was only the sound of the rain and the two of us. "Why couldn't you just tell me?" I said, and I heard my voice go quieter, more exact. "You keep acting like everything has to be solved before I can be included in it, like if I see the mess before it's cleaned up, I stopped. "What do you think I'll do, Seraphine? What exactly are you afraid I'll do?" She looked at me for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the precise weight of something she had not allowed out before. "I think you'll leave," she said. "When you see the parts of me that aren't elegant, the parts that take over instead of asking, the parts that have been running crises and closing damage for so long that I genuinely don't always know how to stop and say, 'What do you need? Can I help?' instead of simply acting as if need has already been assessed and the solution is in progress." She paused. "I'm aware it's not a small flaw." I walked around the counter. She stayed very still, watching me come toward her with an expression that was the most unguarded thing I'd seen from her, not soft, not fragile, but open in the way a window left ajar is open, present and aware and not hiding what it let in. "I remember one thing clearly," she said, and her voice had dropped to something I had to stand close to hear. "From the night we were married, everything else is fragments, but I remember you on that balcony and I remember thinking, she's not looking at me like I'm a weapon or a warning, she's looking at me like I'm a woman." "Seraphine, I don't know when that last happened," she said. "Someone looking at me like I'm simply a person who might be worth knowing." I reached up and touched her face. My hand was not entirely steady. Her breath changed, very faintly, barely audible, but I was close enough to feel it. "You're a woman," I said. "You're also controlling and avoidant and terrible at asking for what you want, and you ordered exactly the right breakfast without asking me because you had been paying attention, and you stood in my studio and told me I'd earned my place like it was an obvious and uncomplicated fact, and you left Thai food at my door without a note, like some kind of beautiful, emotionally unavailable fairy godmother who's doing her best." Something broke open in her expression. It might have been the closest I'd ever seen Seraphine Arden come to laughing. "I don't know what we are," I said. "But I know I don't want to erase the night we got married, not because it was good planning, because something true happened in it, and I'm tired of true things being drowned out by everything else." She closed the distance. The kiss was not careful. It was not tentative or gentle or half-measure. It was the kind that happens when two people have been circling something honest for weeks and finally step into it together. Charged and not quite trembling and exact, her hands finding my face, mine gripping the fabric of her jacket, rain continuing against the glass around us like the city had committed to providing atmosphere whether we wanted it or not. When we finally separated, we were both breathing differently than before. "I moved the timeline," she said, "because I was frightened, not because it was logical or strategic. I was frightened that the 6 weeks would end and I would have no more reason to be near you." I stared at her. "Seraphine, that is the most counterproductive thing I have ever heard from an adult human being." "Yes," she said, and she sounded, improbably, relieved to have it said. Celeste's next move arrived 3 days before the Meridian Winter Gala, the largest industry event of the year, the one where contracts were formally agreed and reputations either consolidated or quietly dismantled. She went to a trade journalist, not with rumor but with a curated story, a representation of the Whitlock family business collapse, timed and framed to land in specific conversation with my marriage to Seraphine, my father's company losing its food safety certification 6 years ago, the supply partners who'd been caught in the fallout, all factually accurate, all 6 years old. All positioned now to suggest that Nora Whitlock had used the Arden connection as rehabilitation strategy for a damaged name. The story ran 48 hours before the gala. My inbox had another collapse. The prospective client who'd been reconsidering came back to formally decline. A vendor partnership I'd cultivated for over a year asked to pause. I received 3 calls from journalists I did not return. I sat in my studio at 7 in the evening and felt the particular weight of watching something you've built absorb damage it didn't deserve. Lila came. She brought wine and the specific expression she wore when she'd decided I needed honesty more than comfort. "Okay," she said, setting 2 glasses on my work table and pushing aside a stack of fabric samples. "Talk." Celeste leaked it. Obviously. "I don't know what to do." "Your studio is fine," Lila said, with the flat certainty of someone who has watched me panic before and kept their diagnosis accurate. "Your studio is fine because your work is good and the work is documentable, and the people worth impressing know the difference between someone's family history and someone's professional record. The ones who are wobbling weren't going to last anyway. Some of them are not your people. They were always going to need a reason." She handed me a glass. "What about Seraphine? What about her?" "Nora." I looked at the ring. I'd been wearing it continuously for almost a month now. It had stopped feeling foreign somewhere around week 2 and started feeling like its own statement, which was information I had been processing very slowly. In a corner of my mind I kept slightly dim. "I love her," I said, and then I sat with the weight of that for a moment. "Oh no," I added. Lila, demonstrating the finest qualities of a decade of friendship, did not say anything. She just looked at me with the expression of someone who had been waiting for the sentence for approximately 3 weeks. Seraphine called that evening. "I've seen the story," she said. I know. "I want to respond. On your behalf. Publicly." A pause. "With your approval first. I'm asking this time. I'm not moving without your agreement." I closed my eyes. "What would you say?" "That the Whitlock family's past is not the subject under discussion, that your work stands on its own record and anyone with professional access to that record understands this, that using someone's old grief to damage their current standing is a demonstration of the attacker's character, not the target's." Another pause. "And that my wife is not available as a narrative for other people to construct around." My chest did something inconvenient. "You'd say that, publicly." "I'd say it in a full-page statement in every relevant trade publication if you asked me to." Celeste will adjust her expectations," Seraphine said, and her voice had moved into the place it occupied when the debate was over. "She has believed that protecting the Arden name meant having control over me. I have allowed this because the friction of opposing it was tiring and because I told myself it was easier, but easier has started costing things that are not mine to pay with anymore." I leaned against my studio wall, holding the phone, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built carefully and alone, and said, "Okay, say it." The Meridian Winter Gala occupied a ballroom I had helped design the lighting concept for 3 years ago. I knew where the chandeliers sat in relation to the windows. I knew where the warm light pooled, and where the shadows accumulated, and where, if you stood in precisely the right place, the entire room looked like the inside of a memory. I arrived without Seraphine. We hadn't coordinated it. She had another obligation earlier in the evening, and I had decided somewhere between Lila's wine and the phone call that I needed to arrive on my own. Not because Seraphine couldn't walk in with me, because I needed to walk in on my own terms first. Celeste was near the entrance in her element, working the room with the ease of someone who has been trained to regard this kind of gathering as home territory. She saw me. Her expression organized itself into something practiced and cool and very carefully not surprised. I walked past her. I found my table. I ordered a glass of water because I was being intentional this time. I was sitting with my professional composure arranged around me like furniture I actually owned when Celeste materialized beside me, quiet and deliberate. "You should go," she said, "before this evening becomes harder for you than it needs to be." "This is my industry," I said. "I've been working in it for 6 years. I've earned my seat at this table, not because of your sister, not because of my family name, and not in spite of my family history. Because of 6 years of work that I can document and that people in this room have paid for and praised. You're welcome to disagree with that assessment, but I'm staying." She opened her mouth. She didn't get to use it. The room shifted, not loudly, not with announcement. simply with the collective, involuntary reorientation that rooms make when Seraphine Arden enters one. She was in midnight blue, the dark kind that holds light instead of reflecting it. She moved through the ballroom with the ease of someone for whom this kind of space has never been a test. Her eyes found me first, then moved briefly to Celeste, then back to me. She arrived at the table. She looked at her sister. "Celeste," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, and very final. "I think there are other people here you should be speaking with." "Seraphine, I'm not suggesting it." Celeste left. Not with drama, with the careful, face-saving poise of someone who has recognized the exact position they're standing in and decided to relocate. I watched her go. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, something quieter. The end of a rivalry that had cost me more than it ever should have. Seraphine sat beside me. She didn't look victorious. She looked like someone who had done a necessary and heavy thing and was sitting with the weight of it. "Are you all right?" she said. "I'm better now," I said. A journalist appeared at the table's edge, the circling kind, the one who had been orbiting all evening waiting for the moment. "Miss Arden," he said, "could you comment on—" "I could," I said. He turned to me, recalibrated. I hadn't prepared this. It arrived the way the honest things do, clear and slightly terrifying and very present. "My studio was built from 6 years of unglamorous work," I said. "My reputation is mine. What happened with my family is a story about difficult years and the people who navigated them, not a judgment on who I've become. And my marriage—" I looked at Seraphine. She was very still. Her expression was open in that window left ajar way. "Started as an accident. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I woke up in a hotel suite with a ring on my finger and no clear memory of exactly how it got there, and that is an objectively absurd situation. But I'm not still wearing this ring because of an accident. I'm wearing it because I choose to. Those are different things, and they matter differently." The journalist was writing. Seraphine's hand found mine under the table. I pressed her fingers. She pressed back. The months that came after were not frictionless. Nothing that matters is. But they were real, which is what we had wanted. What we had both, separately and then together, wanted most. Seraphine learned to ask before acting. She was not consistently successful. She was built to solve, to anticipate, to protect by doing. It was how she was wired, and some of it was beautiful, actually, when she turned it toward things that needed tending. But she tried. She said, "What do you need?" before I've already arranged it. She told me when she was worried instead of just managing the thing she was worried about. Coming from Seraphine, this was not small. This was revision, which is harder than building from scratch. I learned to let her in before I was drowning. To say I need help while I still had the breath to say it instead of after. We were, between us, two people who had spent years cultivating the specific skill of being capable alone and learning to be capable together, to let competence coexist with need, to let someone else hold something without it meaning you failed to hold it yourself, was its own practice. We were patient with each other in the ways that mattered, and impatient in the ways that meant we were paying attention. Celeste called Seraphine in December. The call lasted an hour. Whatever was said in it, Seraphine was quiet for the rest of the evening afterward. Not the cold kind of quiet, the contained kind, the kind that's working something through. I didn't push. I sat beside her on the couch in the penthouse with the winter city laid out below us like a circuit board, lit and running, and let the quiet be okay. "She's not cruel," Seraphine said eventually. "She's frightened. She always has been. Celeste has spent her whole life believing the Arden name was protection and prison at the same time. She fights because she doesn't know another way to feel safe. She attacked you because you were close to something she thought was only hers." "That doesn't excuse what she did," I said. "No," Seraphine agreed. "It doesn't. But it means she might be capable of something better eventually, with time and with whatever she decides to do with it." She looked at me, and in her face was the particular exhausted tenderness of someone who has loved someone complicated for a very long time. "I have to believe that's possible. She's my sister." I took her hand. "Then we believe it," I said. "Both of us. For now." She turned her hand over and held mine. The Arden Group's newest boutique hotel had a greenhouse wing, all tempered glass and controlled warmth, ferns and blossoming fruit trees, and the particular quality of light that passes through glass and green and arrives on the other side turned gold. I'd been contracted for the opening event after pitching through the standard channels, winning it through my portfolio, and a presentation that I'd stayed up 3 consecutive nights refining, and Seraphine had formally recused herself from the selection committee, which I understood had involved a pointed email to 3 colleagues and at least 1 raised eyebrow from the committee chair. I was there on the afternoon before the opening, working through the final details. The floral installations, the lighting angles, the long tables set for the dinner, the small handwritten cards at each place that I'd debated over for a week and finally landed on because the venue was about growth, and so was the dinner. I heard the door. Seraphine stood at the entrance to the greenhouse wing, still in what her afternoon had apparently required, a charcoal blazer, her hair down from its usual arrangement, her jacket over one arm. She looked at the space. She looked at it the way she looked at things she was taking seriously, which was carefully and without hurry. I let her. She walked through the length of it slowly. She paused at the window where the last of the afternoon light came in at an angle that made everything it touched look like it was made of something slightly better than it actually was. She stopped there, looking at the city below, at the light falling through the glass and the green, at the tables and the lanterns and the quiet architecture of a room that had been made, deliberately, to feel like a rival. She turned back. "You did this," she said. "I did this," I confirmed. She crossed the room to me. She stopped close. The close we had by now stopped pretending was accidental. She lifted my left hand and looked at the ring, the same thin gold band from Reverend Dickie Holt, at 2:47 in the morning, simple and uncomplicated and worn now for months with a meaning it had not started with. "I want to say something," she said, "and I want you to let me finish before you respond." "Okay," I said. "When I woke up in Las Vegas and saw that ring," she said, "I did what I described as recalculating. I was calm. I was practical. I said we should have it handled immediately." She paused. "But the truth is that in the 4 seconds before I did any of that, when I saw the ring on my hand and looked at you, I felt the most uncomplicated happiness I had experienced in years, and then I put it away because I had no framework for holding it. And then I spent the following weeks pretending I had put it away successfully, which I had not." I watched her face. She continued. "I am not an easy person," she said. "I take over without asking. I default to management when I should choose presence. I love with too much structure and not enough words, and I will frustrate you in all the same ways indefinitely because that's how I'm built, and the best I can do is stay aware of it. But I am also someone who has been lonely for a very long time. And I saw you looking at me on a balcony at 2 a.m., and you looked at me like I was worth looking at, not for what I could arrange or who I was connected to or how useful my family's name might be, just as a woman who was standing there. And I would very much like to stop acting as though I want to undo any of this. I stood in the middle of the greenhouse I had designed, in the light I had arranged, and I thought about all the ways I had spent years armoring myself. Against the fallout of my family's collapse, against Celeste's calculated cruelty, against the specific terror of wanting something and not getting it, and how most of that armor had been load-bearing in ways I no longer needed it to be. "Seraphine," I said. "Yes." "That was a lot of words for you." Something moved across her face, the real smile, the rare one I'd been collecting since the beginning. "It was," she agreed. "I'm glad you said all of them." I kissed her in the greenhouse, in the golden afternoon light, under the lanterns I'd hung and beside the tables I'd set, in the middle of a career I had built on stubbornness and skill and the refusal to let anyone else write the story. I kissed her with everything I had, the nervousness and the certainty and the 4 months of watching her try and the specific joy of being known by someone who paid attention. The ring on my finger was warm, not with the warmth of an obligation or a mistake corrected, not the warmth of scandal managed or optics controlled, the warmth of something chosen twice, once at 2:47 in the morning by 2 people too honest to pretend they didn't mean it, and once in the clear and sober light of everything that followed. I had spent so long being afraid that the ground I was standing on wasn't solid enough, that my studio was too small, my name too damaged, my ambitions too large for what I'd been given to start with. I had spent so long looking at the ring with the low-grade panic of someone waiting for the thing to be taken back. I looked at it now, in the greenhouse light. Seraphine's hand was in mine. The trees around us were blooming in the controlled warmth of a room designed to make things grow. Outside, the city was doing what cities do, loud and continuous and entirely indifferent to anyone's personal narrative. And I felt, with a clarity I hadn't felt since before my family's name became something people handled carefully. Home. Not a place, not a penthouse or a studio or a gold-trimmed hotel suite too beautiful for a ceiling. The particular, specific home of being known and staying anyway, of being chosen not because of what you can offer or who you used to be, but because of the exact, specific, complicated, occasionally infuriating person you actually are. Seraphine looked at me. She looked at me the way she had on a balcony at a Las Vegas gala, in the moment I had only half remembered until she described it back to me, like I was simply a woman, and like that was more than enough. "Stay," she said, not as demand, as invitation. "I'm already here," I said. The greenhouse held the light, the lanterns held their warmth. Outside, the city ran on in its loud and luminous way, and in the glass and green of the room I had made, something that had started as accident finished as home.